Welcome, everybody, to the initial session of Back to Baldwin, where we'll be exploring James Baldwin and his works. My name is Daryle Brown. I serve as the Director of Social Justice at Trinity United Church of Christ, and I'd like to open us with a prayer. If you could bow wherever you are. Dear Lord, we thank you for this opportunity to use technology to bring us together, to explore, to learn, to share, and to hopefully get excited and to move to make change in this world. We ask that you keep the tech working properly for us this evening, that you help us to move people in their understanding of James Baldwin, and at the end of the day, everybody is just as excited about the next sessions as they were about our first session. We ask these and all things in Jesus' name, amen. So again, welcome. My name is Daryle Brown. I serve as the Director for Social Justice here at Trinity United Church of Christ. And I'm just going to do a little introduction of what we're doing here with this Back to Baldwin. Our goal is pretty simple. We want to present ideas and perspectives for discussion and consideration, not necessarily to draw definitive conclusions. This is really going to be an exploration for us. There's something in the work of Baldwin for everyone. We hope everyone in our study group will find something in his works that contributes to their positive worldview, or for those steeped in Baldwin, something new. Our registration form, we asked the question, what books have you read? What Baldwin books have you read? And while just about everybody has read something, there were a few among us that were truly steeped in Baldwin. And I'm just going to shout them out. All of these folks read 10 or more Baldwin books. Donna Williamson, my good friend Olivia Chase, Jacqueline Davis, Karen Starks, Amber Perry, Joyce Russell, and Adrian Curry. So you folks may have to come in as an expert as we move this thing along. So Greg Garnett, the author of The Gospel According to Baldwin, says of Baldwin that, quote, he saw himself as a prophetic character, like Jeremiah, a person given a special commission to tell the truth, no matter how hard or painful that might be. Jeremiah is known as a truth teller to power, and he spent plenty of time scorned and even imprisoned. He spent his life trying to bring his people back into right relationship with their God. Now, while Baldwin may not have been focused on bringing his people back into relationship with God, he certainly spent his life telling truth to power and working to get people in right relationship with each other, loving their neighbor as themselves. So why study Baldwin? To attempt to hear this prophet's voice as he consistently shouts life-changing notes of truth to realize the beloved community. It's amazing how much of his work and his conversation is so relevant today. Justifying his critiques of America in Notes of a Native Son, Baldwin writes, quote, I love America more than any other country in this world. And exactly for this reason, I insist on the right to criticize her perpetually, unquote. This perpetual criticizing was the prophet's attempt to get crucial messages through to Black folks, and especially to whites, those that live in a fake space of privilege that they so often deny. And as Baldwin puts it, they find it difficult, if not impossible, to learn anything worth learning. Garrett summarizes this perspective saying, there's a reason prophets have to keep calling at the top of their lungs. If people were ready to listen and change, one warning would be enough. So as we dig into Baldwin, it is my prayer that together we will be refreshed anew by his insightful understanding of the human condition, and that his work will excite in us the energy, hope, and confidence to build toward that beloved community. So now, before we kick off this first session, I'd like to recognize and thank the team that has been working to pull this together. Of course, a big thank you to Reverend Moss, who Reverend Moss was enthusiastic as any of us when I shared the idea of this project with him. Our planning and implementation team, Kevin Tyson, my right-hand man working in social justice at Trinity for 15 years or more. Tiwanda Parker, the servant leader of our career development, who has taken on additional challenges and work within the justice areas of Trinity. And we'll talk about later a project that we're going to have in August associated with this effort, tied in with Baldwin's 100th birthday. It was her idea, so I'll put that out there now. Dr. Stephanie Davenport, a former teacher, retired principal, and serious bibliophile. If you ever go to her house, you will definitely be tripping over books, and a lot of them will be Baldwin books. Olivia Chase, just a good friend and longtime partner in the Next Movement and our film festival here. And finally, Reverend Dr. Christophe Ringer, who was a friend, and we shared work together for many years over at Community Renewal Society, both having served as their chairman. So with that, I am going to bring forward Christophe Ringer.
Good evening. It's wonderful to be here. And what I'd like to do this evening is to begin to orient us to the conversation by talking a little bit about theology, what theology is, and how this relates to James Baldwin. Theology is a form of thinking. It seeks to understand the ultimate significance of our lives and the world in which we live, using the ideas, beliefs, practices, languages, and experiences of a spiritual tradition and community. Theology grapples with the urgent and perennial issues in human life, such as redemption, salvation, truth, justice, faith, evil, suffering, responsibility, hope and despair, community, love, and God. It makes a claim about the truth of the world as it is and how the world should be. It discerns the injustices in our world that misshape and distort who we are and who we might become, while also providing a vision of hope for a more just world. James Baldwin was deeply shaped by the experiences of the Black Pentecostal church. Ultimately, Baldwin may have left the church, but the culture and ideals, the vocabulary and vision of the church never left Baldwin. And maybe it's through Baldwin that the heart of the gospel is liberated from the bondage of white supremacy that has so long infected churches in America. Baldwin's life is a powerful witness to the theological significance of the arts to challenge us as individuals, families, communities, and as a nation. It's been said that our capacity for good makes democracy possible, and our capacity for evil makes democracy necessary. As a modern-day prophet, Baldwin challenges us to go even deeper, to understand the difficult, painful, and ugly truths about who America is and who we've been, to wrestle with the evil that exists in our everyday lives, and to claim the goodness and beauty in this life, and to choose that goodness and beauty again and again. And Baldwin understood so well that the fate of the nation depends on our ability to do this. Walking with Baldwin reminds us that prophets are not always found in pulpits. As a literary prophet, Baldwin also holds up a mirror to our own individual lives. How have we internalized mythologies that distort who we are and rob us of who we might become? Are we living in bad faith, accepting pleasing falsehoods and rejecting uncomfortable truths? And here Baldwin is also pastoral, as his challenge is also compassionate. He holds up the mirror so that we might see our shadows as well as our light, creating pathways for us to love ourselves and one another. In 1965, in an interview, Baldwin claimed, "I believe in love and that we must save one another." Walking with Baldwin is to journey with someone with a keen spiritual and theological discernment. In the wake of the horror of the 16th Street Baptist Church bombing that took the lives of Denise McNair, Addie Mae Collins, Carol Robertson, and Cynthia Wesley, Baldwin was invited to be in conversation with the famed theologian Reinhold Niebuhr to grapple with the meaning of a stained glass window where the face of a white Jesus had been blown out. Niebuhr argued that this was the failure of the church. However, Baldwin discerned a profound opportunity. He says this: "The absence of the face is something of an achievement, since we've been victimized so long by an alabaster Christ. It suggests something more serious, and to me it sums up the crisis that we've been living through. If Christ has no face, then perhaps it is time that we give him a new face, and to make the whole ideal, the whole hope of Christian love, a reality." For that community of faith, they did reimagine, replacing that stained glass window with this image of Jesus. This community of faith began to embody a central theological claim from Baldwin, that the concept of God has any validity or any use. It can only be to make us larger, freer, and more loving. And so we ask you to join this journey with Baldwin as we discern the presence of hope in the midst of despair, renewal among ruins, and the possibilities of being more authentic, larger, freer, more loving, more just, in finding the sacred in one another to build the culture we want for this moment. And we are so blessed to be able to enter into this conversation with the guidance of the Reverend Dr. Otis Moss III, the esteemed pastor of Trinity United Church of Christ, a prophetic figure in his own right, and someone who is deeply in tune and invested in the power of the arts, even moving into film production himself. So without further ado, I give you now Reverend Dr. Otis Moss.
Thank you so much. I'm incredibly excited about the conversation that we will have this evening. I want to thank all of those who've organized this digital collective of Baldwinites online for the work that will happen over the next several weeks in this Back to Baldwin study group. Just such a marvelous idea. And I was so excited when Daryle Brown shared the vision of the social justice ministry to do this work. And to you, Dr. Ringer, we thank you for your framing theologically the idea of Baldwin in relationship to theology. So I am just incredibly excited about this conversation. For those who may be Baldwin neophytes or novice, the book that has been chosen by our ministry, I believe, is perfect in terms of an introduction by Greg Garrett's book of the Gospel according to James Baldwin. He gives a wonderful introduction of understanding Baldwin's career, life, and impact in America, and what he means and what he meant to so many people across the African and American and African American diaspora. And so, if you've not picked up the book, I would encourage you. And I might add that when I posted about this program that we are doing, the author tagged me and was so very appreciative. He serves at Baylor University as a professor there, and was delighted to hear that a church is utilizing his book. Professor Garrett has been teaching Baldwin probably in upwards of over 20 years, and has his own personal story in terms of connecting with the work of Baldwin, how it opened him up, not only spiritually, but in terms of his thinking and his academic work. As a person of European descent, Baldwin deeply challenged him. But let us begin with just a little bit in terms of Baldwin's background and why this gentleman, I believe if there is a Mount Rushmore, if there is a Mount Rushmore of literary figures, I think Baldwin definitely has to be upon it for what he was able to do in terms of transforming the way that we look at the essay, the way that we engage the novel, and the way that we understand nonfiction, his particular project. So Baldwin, who was raised in New York City, born in 25 or 26, I believe, and never went to college, but was steeped in Black culture, the Black church culture, and was introduced to American letters by one of his teachers. Baldwin's major influences, as he said, that really make him who he is, was one, his stepfather, a gentleman by the name of David Baldwin. One of his teachers, that was, I think, Oral Miller. And then, of course, the Black church and the introduction into the understanding of the literary tradition that comes out of the Harlem Renaissance. I want to begin with a little reflection in reference to Baldwin's father or stepfather, correctly, who was part of the Pentecostal tradition, minister, and had an incredible influence on Baldwin, though they had a rocky relationship. A very insecure gentleman who was the product of what uh, racism does to a human being, and found some comfort in the church, but not transformation in the church, which was seen in terms of how David Baldwin treated his children, his biological children one way, and then, of course, treating James Baldwin another way. And young James Baldwin witnessed the way in which his stepfather found this comfort, but not necessarily transformation within the church, found a safe space. But at the same time, the idolatry or the spirit of white supremacy held and shaped him so much. And Baldwin, being such a keen observer of human behavior, noticed not only that, but much of that was implemented into his writing. The second piece that is incredibly important is the Black church, specifically the Pentecostal church, is incredibly important to understanding Baldwin. His writing has the air and even the syntax of the King James version of the Bible, and the poetic prose of the prophet, whether it be Jeremiah or Isaiah, and it rings with the rhythm of the preacher and the musician. The church was the space where Baldwin began to understand the power of community and language. Not unlike August Wilson, who used to sit in the corner of bars and listen to people. Baldwin was a keen observer and would listen to the rhythms and the communication of not only the preacher, but people who were in this small Pentecostal community. In his first book, that he writes in reference to about the church, and it could be to some degree, some could say semi autobiographical in terms of talking about Go Tell It on the Mountain, in terms of talking about this relationship this young man has, and in relationship to his family, his faith, his friends, all of these things that seem to come about in this work. But if you read this piece, you will hear at times, unlike other writers, Baldwin can place you in Black space, where some people are able to describe chair over here, the house looked like this. There was this wooden spoon and fork on the wall. The way Baldwin structures sentences in the novels has the rhythm and the air that you feel within a Pentecostal community. There is a rhythmic nature of the structure of his sentences that is absolutely extraordinary. And the church never left him, though he had this incredible critique of the church, particularly in terms of its failure to live up to the message. One little an item that I might add, that when Dr. King was assassinated, Baldwin was deeply broken by this, because he saw the civil rights movement, the freedom movement, this work as an embodiment of the values of the Black church tradition, and Dr. King bringing forth the truth to America, but at the same time redeeming an institution that had been utterly, tragically destroyed by white supremacy, specifically the church. He saw this Black movement, this prophetic movement, redeeming this idea of one could live out these particular values. And so the church fits prominently, if you know the rhythm of the Pentecostal preacher, the belief and understanding of the unrestrained idea of the Spirit, of the creation of community, and the poetic nature of the way in which the preacher would speak. All of a sudden, you begin to see the imprint on Baldwin's writing. And so you have the church as an influence, but then you also have this man, David Baldwin, as an influence, who is an example of, again, how white supremacy can destroy the human personality, and witnessing the contradictions of a person who is seeking to be better, but is deeply broken. And that leads Baldwin, I believe, from all that I have read, into this artistic idea that is not the role of the artist to create sentimentality and romanticism about a moment, but the artist, when writing, should create characters and scenes that speak to the depth of who human beings are. That even with a protagonist, you should see the fullness of who that person is, and all of their scars and brokenness. And even in an antagonist, one should see the purpose and drive of an individual who may be pointed in the wrong direction, but inherently may not be an evil or bad person. The complexity is what Baldwin is attempting to do. He is drawing again from the prophetic tradition, just like Jeremiah, saying, I'm calling you to account, not that you are evil, but that you have gone astray, which is different. And Baldwin draws in on this and beautifully frames in such a marvelous way what the human condition is all about. Now, one of the things that I love about Baldwin, this brother is unapologetic and unashamed about sharing the truth. Now, he was enamored and was blessed to have a relationship with Richard Wright. But as Professor Garrett talks about, he embodies the whole Oedipus Rex idea of uh, overthrowing the one who brought you, mentored you, and blessed you in this world. And he writes the essay, which I would encourage everyone to read, that puts him on the map. Now remember now, Baldwin never went to college. Baldwin was a studier of, he studied quote unquote American letters. And he studied Richard Wright. We're talking about Native Son Richard Wright, Black Boy Richard Wright, Uncle Tom's Children Richard Wright, the most lauded Black writer of the era when Baldwin was young. And he is being mentored by Richard Wright. But then he rereads Native Son from a completely different perspective. Instead of the eyes as a fan, he begins to read it from the perspective as an artist. And he realizes in this essay, Everybody's Protest novel, that Richard Wright has fallen into the white gaze and is perpetuating the same stereotypes that were also placed upon Black people by another writer by the name of Harriet Beecher Stowe, Uncle Tom's Cabin. That what Wright does is, he claims, is that we have a character named Bigger Thomas who does not have the fullness of personality, who just simply is a representation of what racism does to Black people. And the novel is structured in such a way to point people toward the quote unquote, the church of the Communist Party. In other words, he's saying, Richard Wright, you're functioning as a conservative fundamentalist evangelist. That's what you're doing. You are trying to convert people to a particular cause. You miss out on the opportunity to share the fullness and complexity of the human condition because you simply have an agenda. And he makes this juxtaposition between Richard Wright and Harriet Beecher Stowe. One of the most lauded books, turn of the century, Harriet Beecher Stowe's Uncle Tom's Cabin. People love Uncle Tom's Cabin. Baldwin says it's sentimental. And what it does is it removes the agency of the main Black character to give white guilt, but at the same time, remove the self-examination from white people, where they just say, oh, it's slavery is bad. But as you can see, these Black people are not complex human beings. They don't have the full understanding of who they are. And he draws this line. It's rather brilliant. It's harsh too. Between, I can imagine, well, it's actually written. Richard Wright was pretty upset that Baldwin had just straight up, he didn't throw shade, he dumped shade on Richard Wright and said, man, you're a brilliant writer, but you are in line with Harriet Beecher Stowe in not seeing the full complexity of Black people. Baldwin does it again. He's continuing doing this. His observations are extraordinary. For example, a beloved American film called Guess Who's Coming to Dinner? Baldwin absolutely takes his pen and uses it as if it is a surgical knife and goes at Who's Coming to Dinner. First thing, he goes at the character that played by Sidney Poitier. What we would call the magical Negro. That Sidney Poitier is super extraordinary. He's a doctor. He's an exceptional Negro, because Baldwin is saying white people, because of their blindness, are unable to accept the ordinary. In other words, they can't have characters that are just like them. Characters that have good days and bad days, characters that have complexity. They have to have a Black person who's so extraordinary, because the purpose and the agenda of the film is to say interracial marriage is all right if it's an exceptional Negro. Now, white people can get married and have, just terrible relationships and all that kind of stuff. He's saying in order for us to be fully human, that everybody has to have the full complexity. But then he does something else when he lifts up the other magical safe Negro character, the Mammy character in the film, that's played by the maid, who was a part of quote unquote the white family that Sidney Poitier was marrying into. And Baldwin goes on to say that this character had to be present to make white people feel safe. That the film in itself really does not go through new ground. It's a repeat of Uncle Tom's Children. It is the flip side of Uncle Tom's Cabin. I'm sorry. Uncle Tom's Children is Richard Wright. It's the flip side of Bigger Thomas. But again, making Black people stereotypes essentially to assuage white guilt so that white people don't have to fully engage the complexity of what white supremacy does to them and does to other people. And so the system stays intact. Baldwin is extraordinary at being able to do this. One of the essays that actually just blessed my life was reading Baldwin when he was talking about falling in love with the blues. Basically, falling in love with the musicality and the language and the poetry that comes out of the Black tradition. He talks about how he stopped hating Shakespeare and learned to love the blues, saying that blues in itself was similar to the writings of Shakespeare. That he was hating on Shakespeare, not realizing that Shakespeare was much like a blues musician. He was not a writer for those who were the upper echelon class of England. But he comes out of a different tradition and is writing about ordinary people and was embracing the language of the day. We see it as being the King's English today, but he was saying Shakespeare was writing for folks on the street. And when he realized Shakespeare's writing for people on the street, and that Shakespeare had to study the language of the people in the community, he realized that the work of the blues musician, the work of the blues poet, and the work of the preacher, i.e., Dr. King, the structure and basis and blessing of what they were able to do orally and orally was in itself on the same level as Shakespeare. The syntax, the structure, the double entendre, the brilliance of the work. For example, when T-Bone Walker does something like this in a song that many people have heard called Stormy Monday, they call it Stormy Monday, but Tuesday's just as bad. Wednesday's worse, but Thursday's oh so sad. On Friday, the eagle flies, but on Saturday, I go out to play. But on Sunday, you will find me on my knees to pray. According to Baldwin, these types of lyrics, this is poetry and prose that gives double entendre, that speaks to existential and eschatological systems. This is what Baldwin's project was about. As an artist, he was elevating the visibility of Black culture, was critiquing at the same time American white supremacy. He was in no way shy about the fact that here was a Black queer man and writing about it in the 1960s and saying that I am a part of the movement as a Black queer man. And the complexity, I refuse to write characters that are characterizations out of the white imagination or out of Black homophobia in terms of how I will write my characters. You need to see me as a part of your family. The beauty of James Baldwin is he forces us to confront our own bigotry in our community. He forces America to confront the systematized myths that are put in place to protect their fragility. He puts in place all of these amazing artistic challenges for us that, not unlike Jeremiah, says to us, America, you have strayed. Those who think they are white, and I have to use that word think because it's a made up idea, you have strayed. Those of you who are black, there is an idolatry that has happened within our community where we have deified whiteness or created respectability politics. There's a bigotry that functions within our community to those who are queer. All of this Baldwin is doing in his project. So I would encourage you to read. Reed Garrett's book gives you a great introduction of an overview of Baldwin. But one final thing that I almost forgot that I wanted to mention about Baldwin that I absolutely love. There is a major difference between reading a Baldwin novel than there is to reading Baldwin nonfiction. Huge difference. And here's one thing that's amazing about this. As I said, when Baldwin writes in this novel, there's this poetry, the structure and the way he does things. But watch the shift when you're reading an essay by him. What Baldwin does, because he studied the English language and grammar so closely, sometimes, as in one of his essays, it escapes me right now, the entire first paragraph is one sentence. But here's the thing, it is completely grammatically on point. Baldwin does something different when he's writing nonfiction, where he is extending the canon. He has studied the canon so well, the structure and grammar at such a level that he is able to break rules and rewrite rules and then tell you, well, the person who actually did what I did it in 1832. I'm just repeating this in the nonfiction realm. The man was brilliant. I mean, it's just, he didn't necessarily carry it around on his shoulder like a chip on his shoulder. He would just do stuff. How should I put it? Baldwin was not unlike when Louis Armstrong would play the trumpet. Armstrong was so effortless that other people thought they could do what Louis Armstrong did until they got a hold of the trumpet and they're trying to figure out how did he do that? It seemed to be so easy. It's called practice, brother. He would go on and say, I've been practicing this for a long time to get that one tone out. Baldwin has been practicing since he was 11 years old to get that one sentence out. This is the brilliance of James Baldwin and why we should study. He helps us deepen our relationship with God and deepen our relationship with each other. And he forces us to look in the mirror and raise questions. What do we hold as idols that become our ultimate concern? And that's why I'm grateful for this conversation on the prophet. And I would even don him a saint, Saint Baldwin. A saint is simply someone who does their work so well and recognizes their calling at such a level that other people must turn and model their work after them. So I would say he's a prophet and he is our saint, James Baldwin. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Pastor Moss. We got a lot to chew on. The good thing is it's on YouTube, so folks can go back and kind of dissect some of the things you said. Now Kevin is going to facilitate a conversation with the folks that have been watching online. If you have any questions, I think you put it out there once. Put your questions in the chat, and we'll pass them around the group here to answer them.
Well, thank you very much, Dr. Ringer and Dr. Moss, for some powerful insights and an introduction to what we hope will be a series of powerful discussions about a powerful person. I just wanted to add that my experience with the great James Baldwin was a rally that I was blessed to help organize in Harlem at Convent Avenue Baptist Church back in the early 1980s, where we were concerned because our featured speaker was Angela Davis, but we had both James Baldwin and Judge Bruce Wright on the program. We had to put speakers outside of the church because it was packed and people came to hear James Baldwin. It was a powerful moment. And yes, they had to reconstruct the church after James Baldwin was done. And if you're familiar with Judge Bruce Wright, and we're talking about in the early 80s, Judge Bruce Wright was the first judge to make and actually practice the idea of no bail. In fact, he was the nickname he was given by the Patrolman Benevolent Association in New York was Turn 'em Loose Bruce, because he made the comment that and practiced that bail was discriminating against Black and poor people. But James Baldwin, and as Dr. Moss had commented, in his eloquent understanding and the language that he used just tore it up. He was truly a genius. So let's have a conversation. And I see there's a question from Sister Charlotte Jenkins. How do we construct the welcome table to serve this generation and generations to come? So I will leave that to both of our phenomenal speakers. Don't rush now. Whoever wants to go first.
I will succeed to Dr. Ringer to go first.
I think the first thing I would just say, thank you for the question. And I think in the spirit of St. Baldwin, I think we have to ask who's not at the table, and why are they not at the table? I was recently at a retreat, and I was talking to a pastor who got a sign on their church saying, "You are welcome." And he decided to change the sign to "You belong here," which is very different. Right? It's not just a matter of hospitality, but rather it's a proclamation of humanity. It is saying you belong at this table. And I think if we begin to kind of shift towards that understanding, I think we can begin to construct that table. Something that moved me personally when the Black Lives Matter movement first kind of popped off. There were clergy who were like, wait a minute, how come we aren't in the front of this? And you had some activists that were saying, well, we don't want to be in spaces. We can't mourn in spaces where our humanity is not affirmed. So it really is, I think, asking that question, who's not at the table and why aren't they there? And how do we kind of retrofit this welcome table?
That's wonderful. I would just simply add, what is the design of the table? Is the table square, rectangle, or circle? And maybe there doesn't need to be a table. Maybe the table needs to be set by creation, meaning the clearing that Toni Morrison talked about in Beloved. Maybe it needs to be the earth needs to be the table, and we just sit upon the terra firma that is not ours. Because soon as we own, somebody starts saying, "It's my seat."
That's right. That's right.
So maybe we need to raise questions about table architecture.
Okay. A couple of comments that we have in the chat. Candace Bell said St. Baldwin has a nice ring to it. Shamamil T. Taking classes in African American literature changed my life. James Baldwin was a sensitive and unique genius. Truth with love. Excellent talk. Thank you, and God bless you all. And we have a question from Nicole. The idea that white audiences need a Mammy or Tilly to feel safe is intriguing. Can you elaborate a bit more on how does this affect our engagement with one another now in our self-expressions?
Nicole, thank you for that question. I brought up Tilly. The name was escaping me when I mentioned it. I'm pretty sure Dr. Ringer will have want to add to this. There's a wonderful scholar by the name of Donald Bogle who wrote a book entitled Toms, Coons, Mammies, Mulattoes, and Bucks: The History of Blacks in American Cinema. And Donald Bogle says every film in American history, really up to a point, a Black character is a Tom, meaning that they work for the white constituency in some form or fashion. Is a coon, is designed to make you laugh and feel good. Is a mammy, who is a desexualized Black woman who cares for white needs. Or a mulatto is a tragic mixed character, usually of a lighter complexion, who is unable to live between both worlds and usually dies at the end, or very sad and tragic or something of that nature. And then there is a buck, the over-sexualized Black male character who is dangerous, therefore needs control. And whether you're talking Birth of a Nation, which all these characters came out of Birth of a Nation pretty much, which was one of America's kind of first major film productions. The film was shown in the White House and helped lead the rise of what was known as the Ku Klux Klan. Guess Who's Coming to Dinner plays into all of those aspects. And movies from the 60s and many of the films of the 70s Black exploitation era play into that. As great as, I appreciate what Isaac Hayes did in Shaft and, and all of that and whatnot. John Shaft is a Buck character, essentially. He's the over-sexualized, even though there's some subversive nature in that. And so in this, how does this affect our engagement is that the white gaze, or let me put it this way, the white gaze sees Black fantasies as Black documentary. So whenever we create something that is, hey, I'm making a fantasy, I'm playing a part, the white gaze says, oh, that's a documentary. That's the way Black people are. But white people get to be the full spectrum of humanity, where anything that we do is all of a sudden a documentary, or it is outside of the norm as being exceptional. So we have to deconstruct the white gaze and understand specifically the way in which that gaze, through film, through music, through art, through engagement with the police. The police view Black people through a white gaze that has been framed by The Birth of a Nation and Thomas Kuhn's Mulattoes and Bucks is the engagement. So that is why Tamir Rice is viewed as a threat, because the gaze has been centered on a mythology about Black people. And we have to destroy the mythology and help white people to see that they're not white. They just made up something because whiteness is in relationship to Blackness. Because when Black people leave the room, white people stop being white and they become ethnic. Oh, you're Irish, Scottish. Oh, this, that, and that. Black people come in, whoop, they're white again. Because ethnicities have culture. Ethnicities have history and food. There is no white food. You don't go to a restaurant and say, ooh, give me some of that white food. No, you go to an Italian restaurant, you go to a Greek restaurant, you go to a Chinese restaurant, because that ethnicity locates to a geography. That geography has a particular culture and a history, but whiteness in itself is completely in relationship to Blackness in order to keep Blackness in a particular position. And that's what happened, what Hollywood does with Black people, keeping us in the framework of Thomas Kuhn's Mulattoes, Mammies, and Bucks to protect the fragility of so-called whiteness.
No, thank you, Dr. Moss. I think that went over, for some people, that went over their head in the movie Get Out, the idea of having the Bucks on the wall. So Dr. Ringer, question from Laura Hawkins. Actually, a comment and a question. Comment: I'm very intrigued by this description of table architecture. Love the description. Would like to hear more. Recently, some folks in a church I am serving decided that they needed new tables. And what book essay would you recommend as a new student of James Baldwin?
Well, just to echo what Dr. Moss has already shared regarding this question of architecture and design. And one thing that's interesting is that there was a time when architecture was understood as a moral and theological science. Because there's something about architecture that designs for people to interact with each other in a certain kind of way. Right? It's designed so that populations can flow in between each other in a certain kind of way. So part of what I think this is calling us to is a kind of discernment in the life of our congregations, and to think about how is the life of a congregation designed? How do we become reflective about our ritual practices, our liturgical life, the rhythms of congregational life? So I think this is really this question of architecture and design is a call to discernment of our collective lives.
Okay, thank you. Brandy Williams says, looking forward to increasing my studies. And Candace comment, I never had vocabulary for what I thought about Black film characters until now. Wow. So this is a deep discussion. Again, please place any comments or questions in the chat. From Owen Lawson, what a good way to pursue or examine Baldwin's assessment critique of the talented 10th idea. Oh, I'm sorry. What is a good way to pursue or examine Baldwin's assessment critique of the talented 10th idea?
You know, Baldwin actually, with the talented 10th idea that Du Bois introduces, and then Du Bois completely obliterates what he said. A lot of people love to lift up Du Bois' talented 10th, but Du Bois said, I was wrong. It will not be a bourgeois talented 10th that will liberate Black people. That is absolutely wrong. And we have attached that to Du Bois for the longest time.
Yep.
And Du Bois, I mean, he died in Ghana, still telling people, I told you that was wrong. He got sick of people, you know, bringing that thing up. He said, "Yeah, I've written what 25 books, and y'all got one sentence you keep lifting up, and I told you it was wrong." But Du Bois and Baldwin together are perfect partners. Oh my gosh. Du Bois and it is in the Souls of Black Folk. It is I'm trying to remember, it's the third essay where Du Bois talks about education in the rural community and his experience, that if you pair that with notes of the native son and Baldwin's experience, those two pieces go together from different eras absolutely beautifully, and you have a wonderful framework of dismantling the talented 10th, which is a part of respectability politics. So you have a wonderful ability to be able to dismantle those with those two pieces of work.
Thank you. Hey, we have about 15, 20 minutes. Other questions, comments, please put them in the chat. Let's open our imaginations. James Baldwin is one of the celebrated but quote unquote quiet figures. And so, we should really take advantage of this of this great conversation that we're having. And okay, looks like we have some more comments from Andrea Bowman. Good evening, everyone, and thank you so much for offering this all-important series on St. Baldwin. So Rev, I think you may have
Kevin, can I just return to a point in Nicole's question?
Oh, please.
Okay. Nicole's question, you talked about this question of white audiences and the need to feel safe. And I just wanted to offer something to complement what Dr. Moss has shared. There's a professor, Daryle Scott, who's written a really insightful book in which he traces the images of Black people in public policy over the last 100 years. And what he notices is that there are these two images of Black people that continue, they're recurring. And basically images of Black people as pathological, and they're images that inspire either contempt or pity. And so when we think about Bigger Thomas, right, that Richard Wright literally writes Bigger Thomas because he doesn't want white audiences to pity this character. So he makes him just the polar opposite, right? The levels of brutality and violence, but yet in doing that, now he falls into the image that white audiences find contemptible. And so with Baldwin, what you find is a body of work that's actually trying to move us beyond contempt and pity. And to say we're not the problem, right? that you can't just talk about what's wrong with us. Right? And I think that's a really important point, that we have this body of work that really can challenge how our communities are represented, not only in the realm of culture, but how it impacts public policy. Right? Because Richard Wright was actually taken seriously by psychiatry. You have psychiatrists who are literally seeing Richard Wright's work, right, as a source to inform what they're doing. And so Baldwin's work has real impact in recovering the complexity and the humanity of Black people in a number of different fields.
Thank you for sharing that. Andrea's comment, uh, if I can continue, she was saying we're using this book and the discussion as an enrichment activity in African American heritage and education. Is it not possible for us to encourage our young teens and older tweens to participate as listeners and learners? Um, Sister Regina Boyd added, I believe that respectability politics is a thorn in the side of the Black church today. Discuss.
I just want to offer that not only is the thorn, I think it's really, it has become bad theology. There's a way, and Dr. Moss, I'm sure you've had this experience. There's a way in which, you know, if I had $100 for every community meeting I was in which pulling out someone's pants is the solution to a whole host of complex social problems, right? It has become a kind of piety, right, that fundamentally misunderstands some of the really pressing questions facing our community. So I think it is respectability politics for me is kind of morphed into a kind of a piety that I think we really have to wrestle with.
Respectability politics, yeah, you're spot on, and it's part of it's generational. Part of it also is respectability politics comes out of Black trauma. Let's just be honest. That's where it comes from. And the reality was like, you know, don't do this or this will happen. There was a great comedian who he wasn't trying to talk about respectability politics, but he did such a brilliant job with it. I don't think he realized. He said, he's sitting there talking to the audience. He says, hey, y'all, he said, Black people will understand this. Have you ever watched the news and when you hear that there was a shooting and you praying it was not a Black person, and when you say it's Black, you're like, thank you, Jesus. Thank you. Because there's this feeling that if it is one of us, one, we get blamed for it. Two, something can happen to us. And we don't want to fit into this. So it is part of Black trauma. That is what's happened. And within, I think the question was in reference to the church. When you're talking about community meetings, that happens too within the church. But there is also this respectability idea that has upended what was actual resistance. So you have people who were not involved in the movement saying, you know, in the movement, they didn't do something. So you have no idea what these folk were doing. They had a strategy and laid out some stuff. They had a democratic strategy, meaning this, and Vincent Harding is the one that helped me out on this. I was on a soapbox about self-defense and all this kind of stuff. And he said, well, you know, Otis, let's look at this video here. And he shows the march from Memphis. And he said, did you see it? I was like, what? I didn't see anything. What are you talking about? He shows it again. And he says, did you see it? And I said, no. And he says this. He says, your critique of what the sanitation workers were doing, because you're saying that you need to function with a level of self-defense. You're Black power all the way, Otis. He said, in the video, did you see that there were people who were 80 who were marching? There was a differently abled man marching. There were women. There were young people. He said, your dream of liberation is a misogynist dream of men taking care of everyone else. This movement was about everybody being involved in their own freedom. That's very different. And I was like, okay, you know how you get cut like really bad and don't realize you cut? So Vincent Harding, Dr. Vincent Harding, cut me so bad. I'm like bleeding all over the floor and everything. And everybody in the room is like, I ain't asking a question. Otis is over there dead. But it was brilliant because it helped me understand that fundamentalism, respectability politics is a form of fundamentalism, is what he was there. He said, whether you are thinking you're revolutionary, you're a fundamentalist. or whether you're the bourgeois, we need to be quiet and move on. You're a fundamentalist also. He said this movement was not a fundamentalist movement. It was trying to figure out how everybody could participate. And that is human dignity politics. He was saying we want human dignity, not respectability. We don't need your respect to know that we've got human dignity. And it was transformative for, I was 24 at the time. It was, changed my life when he just rocked my world with that. I was like, man, I had never seen that. And it was just absolutely beautiful.
Wow. Interesting. Please, Dr. Ringer, please.
I was saying, Dr. Moss, your reframing of this in terms of trauma, I think is so critical. Because if we reframe it in terms of trauma, then we can see respectability politics as a survival skill. Right? And then we can say, okay, in this situation, this survival skill makes sense. Right? But in another situation, this may be hurting us. So I really appreciate that reframing in terms of trauma, because it allows us to relate to this in a much more generative way. Yeah, so thank you for that.
And I would definitely ride on that coattail, Dr. Ringer and Dr. Moss. You raised that point. Dr. Barbara Ransby at UIC raised the question about, during the strike in Memphis. Very curious that the signs, the majority of the signs said, "I am a man." What about the women? Talking about how that was an intersectional movement, an intersectional strike. Reverend Aris Simpson comment, deep-rooted subliminal condition moving toward change. And our partner, Tiwanda, countering America's notion of the Negro problem. Our bishop, Carol Taylor, it's very internalized and normalized respectability politics. And Regina, yes, thank you for sharing trauma. So I think it's very clear that we have collectively hit on a giant in our story in talking about James Baldwin. And so I would encourage everyone to tell other folks, tell everybody about this, especially our young folks who have no exposure to James Baldwin except what we're doing here. So again, we have a few minutes. Any other comments, questions? Please place them in the chat. Okay. I will turn it back over to our Director of Social Justice at Trinity, Minister Daryle Brown.
Got to get all the right buttons pressed. All right. Thank you. Thank you so much, Kevin, Pastor Moss, Dr. Ringer. This has been everything I had hoped it would be for tonight. A great kickoff. And the good news is that the video will be up on YouTube so people can kind of catch up. I'm just going to give a quick rundown of what is to come. And the folks that are on, you're the only people that are going to know this because we haven't shared this or promoted this yet. Session number 2, we're going to be showing the film I Am Not Your Negro. This was an incredible documentary assembled based on 30 pages of work that James Baldwin had done for this last piece that was going to be a personal perspective of the lives and assassinations of Malcolm X, Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., and Medgar Evers. This is going to be, we're going to do this in a different way. We're going to we got the film. We're going to put it on. We'll all be watching it together, but it's going to be like we're sitting on the couch together because we'll have the chat open and we'll be responding in real time as interesting things occur in the documentary. So it's kind of an experiment, but I'm looking forward to a little more intimate screen sharing and screening of a film and that live interaction. Following the film, we will have a short Q&A, but we want to keep the time down. The film is 90 minutes. So our Q&A is going to be restricted to about 30 minutes.
Daryle, just before you close out, Laura is saying that she's spanking us. She's saying we didn't answer her question about essays and books that she should look forward to as a new Baldwin student.
Well, I'm actually going to cover some of that in the later conversation, because I'll tell you what, let me finish this unless there's something specific that Reverend Moss or Dr. Ringer want to share, because as I get through this conversation, I've got some specific things that you may want to pick up. Anything? Okay. I'm going to go on, and Laura, I got some stuff for you. I Am Not Your Negro, June 28th at 6 p.m. And you'll see more on it. Session 3 is going to cover some James Baldwin essays. We're going to have a conversation about that. And we're also going to have a 100th birthday anniversary celebration. It just so happens that August 2nd is the 100th anniversary of James Baldwin's birthday. So we will have some conversation about a couple of his searing essays. We'll be pulling from the book, The Cross of Redemption, Uncollected Writings. And Laura, that is an excellent book for you to pick up and share. There's lots of different essays in there. Specifically, we're going to be looking at essays entitled To Crush a Serpent, one called We Can Change the Country, and a third, As Much Truth as One Can Bear. Now, those are some examples. We'll probably pull some others that we'll talk about, and we'll share all that in advance. And I mentioned earlier that Tiwanda came up with this idea. So what we're going to be doing to celebrate this occasion is we're having a video essay and poetry contest for young folks from 14 to 25. We have two categories, 14 to 18 and 19 to 25. And we'll be using the prompt of Baldwin's My Dungeon Shook, a letter to my nephew on the 100th anniversary of the Emancipation. So that'll be the prompt for these videos. We also plan to, we're going to show about an hour of this, so we're going to intersperse these videos with thank yous to James Baldwin from various scholars that we can get to do a 2 or 3 minute thank you, James Baldwin, how you influenced my life or my career or my thought processes. So we're going to be pulling all that together, and that's going to be on August 2nd. Then session 4, we're going to focus on conversations that James Baldwin had with people. Conversations with Nikki Giovanni, with Studs Terkel, and Maya Angelou. And we'll also talk about and show his masterful crushing of William Buckley in that debate, that historical debate. So that's session 4, August 30th at 6 p.m. Session 5 is going to be other perspectives on Baldwin. So this is going to really be exploring what some other folks had to say in articles, essays, opinion pieces about Baldwin. Examples are going to be How I Learned That Jesus Was Black is one that was a New York Times piece. Bearing the Silence on James Baldwin and Prayer. And then a third one is James Baldwin and Margaret Mead on religion. Keeping in mind that emphasis of our conversations are connecting Baldwin to his own personal theology, and drawing his perspectives on God and humanity into these conversations. And then the last one for this year is going to be Martin Luther King and James Baldwin. There's a book called The Polished King by Reverend Dr. Joseph Evans, the Dean of the Morehouse School of Religion, that explores Dr. King's oratorical style, but he's constantly connecting it with Baldwin and their common views of America and challenges we face. So we'll be using that book, I think. Don't hold me to it, but if you run out and buy it, it's worth it anyway. We haven't fleshed out the conversation on that yet, but that date is going to be Friday, October 25th at 6:30 p.m. So I gave you guys a rundown of all that's going on. We will be sharing, obviously, this information in other venues. So you didn't have to write all this down. I just wanted to give you a chance to get excited about all the things that we have coming. And with that, we're at the close of our session today, and I'm going to ask Pastor Moss if he could close us out in prayer.
Certainly. Let us go to the Lord in prayer at this moment. Gracious and most loving God, we are thankful for a prophet named James Baldwin. We're grateful for his insight and the creativity and the artistry that still speaks to us, though he has transitioned from this plane. We ask, oh God, that you would give us a revolutionary spirit where we function with radical love, where we seek to live out and embody the message and teaching of Jesus Christ. And to borrow from James Baldwin, let us not be proclaimers of Christ and not doers of Christ. We thank you, O God, for allowing us to come together digitally and for our social justice ministry and their work and their witness. And may you allow our dungeons to shake, and may we be willing to shake the dungeons of those who are locked up mentally, spiritually, and emotionally. In the mighty and wonderful name of Jesus, we pray. Amen.
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 All right. Thank you all. We're shutting it down. We'll see you on June 28th. All right.